Hi everyone. As some of you may be aware, we did a presentation for the Cumbria Wildlife Trust last week, but unfortunately my internet or something didn't work, and I ended up doing the whole presentation to nobody. But that was my fault, I think, and something to do with the internet here at the university. But so this is my newly recorded part of the presentation. So my name's Ellie Kent, and I am one of the project officers for the Back on Our Map project. I lead on 4.5 of the species that Joe talked about. So 4.5 because I joint lead the Duke of Burgundy butterfly with Mick Mayhew. I also lead on the small blue butterfly, the Goldilocks aster, the spike speedwell, and on aspen. And Joe asked me to sort of go through some of these species in a bit more detail, but I thought that, maybe I would just focus on a couple of them. So I decided to do a little presentation on the butterflies because we've had quite an interesting season with them this year. Yeah, so I will crack on with the small blue. So true to its name, it is very small, being the UK's smallest resident butterfly. So if you imagine like the smallest butterfly you can and then make that even smaller, then you get the small blue. It has a wingspan of just 16 to 28 millimeters. So they are quite hard to spot in the wild, especially as they're not that blue. So untrue to their name, they're not very blue. They are more brown, especially the females that you see in the bottom left here. But they do, on the males especially, have these blue iridescent scales that look really beautiful in the sunshine. They are often confused with the common blue, which you see on the top right there, but the common blues are much bigger and they are much more blue. Yeah. So butterflies tend to evolve with this unique dependency on the habitat that they live in, especially, I mean, all species do, but especially butterflies and especially habitat specialist butterflies. They are in some ways quite fussy. So the small blue is no exception to that. And they've developed this dependency on one particular plant, which is kidney vetch. So kidney vetch is the one and only plant that the small blue larvae eat. And the thing about kidney vetch is that it's a poor competitor. So in nutrient rich areas, it will be outcompeted by grasses and other plants quite quickly and then get shaded out and die. So the kidney vetch has, in its own way, adapted. It's been pushed out of these nutrient rich areas to adapt into these much harsher conditions, these nutrient poor places of bare ground. It's evolved to survive really well in these habitats. So you tend to find kidney vetch on these bare areas of limestone grassland, in old abandoned quarries, brownfield sites, slag heaps, like I'll talk about later, and even sand dunes. And you will not find the small blue butterfly where there isn't any kidney vetch. So it's not that the small blue like this habitat, it's that they're dependent on the plant that can survive in these harsh habitats. So the female will lay one egg on a developing flower of the kidney vetch, and she'll lay just one egg because it's thought that the caterpillars are cannibalistic, and this is probably because one plant is enough for one caterpillar. So if there was 2 caterpillars on one, they would compete for a food source. So you'll see the adults flying in the end of May and through June, and the females will then lay their egg. The caterpillars will eat the developing flower of this kidney vetch, and then when they're ready, they will drop to the ground to be dormant caterpillars over winter, under the soil and the moss on the ground, before having a really short chrysalis phase, and then becoming flying again in May and June. And you do, if you're lucky, you can see a second brood of the small blue in August. So because the small blue, one of the biggest issues for the small blue population, especially up here in the north, is that they do occupy these areas of old industrial places and bare ground and old brownfield sites. And the problem with this is that they are nearly always first on the list for development. So the main influence for the small blue population decline is habitat destruction through the development of infrastructure on these habitats. And because the small blue is thought to be a weak disperser and quite a sedentary butterfly, although we don't have loads of data on this just yet, they are unable to colonize new sites of their own accord. So this has actually shown a 45% decline in the distribution of the small blue since the 1970s. So we really want to be a part of making this better for the small blue. So our aim is to reinforce the population of the small blue butterfly at the donor site, which we do have in Cumbria, and then to translocate adult butterflies into new sites in the final year of the project. So this will only be done once we're happy that the donor site has a sustainable population and that the recipient site has a decent and appropriate habitat. The donor site that we do have in Cumbria is the best one that we have at the moment is the Barrow Slag Banks. There are others up in Workington and Silloth. And I don't know if a lot of you have been here, but the slag banks sort of do jut out of the horizon as you come into Barrow Town on the A590, and they have really dramatic topography with some really bright areas of limestone slag, and then really steep cliffs. And in some ways, this is a really good feature because it means that they're less likely to be developed on and much more safe for the small blue. So the slag banks were formed from over a century's worth of waste from the iron and steel mill, as probably most of you know that this was one of the biggest in the world at one point. And it is the last reminder of the town's industrial past. So it has a real cultural significance as well as this ecological importance. It is split into two banks, and the North Bank is the main site for the small blue, although we have found them on the South Bank now. It has these, like I said, great areas of bare limestone, which is great for kidney vetch seed germination, but it also has patches of tall grass, which is good for the adult males for roosting, and areas of scrub, which is great for shelter. And also these really steep slopes or mini slopes as well, which is really perfect for shelter from the prevailing winds of the sea. It has been thought to be the uglier bank of the two because it's been less gardened and managed by the council. But if you go there in spring, it's absolutely fantastic. It's so beautiful in terms of the diversity of flora, wildflowers and birds and insects, and the views are fantastic from the top. You can see straight across into the fells and beautiful views of Warney Island and out to sea. I really recommend people going to visit and maybe even see some small blue there. So there is a really good population of small blue at the slag banks, and this is because there was a translocation from Workington where the area they'd occupied there was actually up for development into a car park. So they were moved here as sort of an emergency conservation measure, and they're absolutely flourishing. And the reason we know they're flourishing is because this year, and one of the coolest things we've done this year is the mark and recapture study. So we've developed some fantastic relationships with many partners in this project, but especially butterfly conservation, and they've been an astounding help with both of the butterfly species. And we had Dave Wainwright from Butterfly Conservation come down and teach us and a group of volunteers and students how to do a mark and recapture study. So this basically involves catching the butterfly and putting little dots on their wing to give them in a unique code that makes each butterfly uniquely identifiable. It was a bit fiddly, but it was a great success. So why are we doing this? Mark and recapture studies are thought to be the most accurate way of getting the best estimate for population size. And this is incredibly important because we obviously want to remove some adults from this population for a translocation. So we want to understand that the population is sustainable enough for us to do that and large enough for us to do that. And because the Slag Banks has such a great population of small blue, there are many conservation organizations looking to use this site as translocation. And as practitioners, I feel like it's irresponsible for us not to understand whether this could detriment the population. And it will help us if we continue this into the future and the future years of the project. It will help us to understand the most sustainable way of translocation, i.e. the maximum number of butterflies that can be taken each season without causing a fluctuation in population size. Also, it gives us really good data on life expectancy and dispersal. So we were catching butterflies up to 2 weeks after we initially found them and marked them, which is a lot longer than anyone initially thought that the small blue were on the wing. So this was really fantastic news for us. Also, it gives us great ideas of their dispersal and their habitat preference. Because we GPS each butterfly that we mark, we can then start to see patterns of their flight range and their use of the habitat. This is actually as far as we're aware, the first mark and recapture study of the small blue butterfly. So we really do hope that the data we get from this can be used to support and contribute other small blue population conservation projects in the future. And because of this, I was a bit nervous about conducting this study because it was the first one with this species, and because they are so tiny and so fragile. But I have to say it was 1,000 times more successful than I even thought it could be. And the fact that we were catching butterflies up to 2 weeks after we initially found them in a healthy state made me much more confident about that we weren't detrimenting them in any way. And as far as I'm aware, there was no fatalities from what we were doing, which again made me feel a lot better about the whole thing. And also, by some trick of fate, I accidentally bought the wrong nets. So these nets have much larger holes in than the ones initially I wanted to buy. And this was really, really great because it meant we could capture the butterflies and then just gently fold them in the folds of the net and dot the butterflies through the holes. It meant we didn't have to handle them with our hands or our fingers at all. And it was as if it was much easier that way, and it felt like we were barely interrupting them. So once we're happy that the barrow population is sustainable enough, we will do a translocation to another site. And the site that we're looking at is Hodbarrow Nature Reserve, which is managed and run by the RSPB. It's an old quarry that was flooded to form this freshwater lagoon that's now really, really popular with breeding terns. But it has really similar habitat and great habitat for the small blue, and similar to Barrow Slag Banks in that it's got bare areas of limestone slag, little mounds, slopes and scrubland, and just beautiful views as well. So we've already done a lot of work at Hodbarrow. We've planted well over 1,000 kidney vetch plants and scattered thousands of seeds, and we're seeing those plants and seeds germinate and grow into mature plants and hopefully begin to reproduce and become sustainable populations for themselves. We've also created some scrapes and bunds, a bund being a little mound of earth that forms a good microclimate and shelter for the small blue, and then the scraped areas in front of that provide good areas for kidney vetch germination. One other great thing about Hodbarrow is that you can't see on this map, but it is in dispersal range of other great sites as well. So if the population here did kick off, then there's other habitats within flight range for the small blue to disperse naturally of their own accord. The last slide on the small blue, just wanted to say that they sort of give us a little bit of hope. They wouldn't exist on some of these sites if it wasn't for the industry that had happened previously. And because although there was a lot of environmental damage because of this industry, it's great to know that some species can actually benefit from this in the long term. And I'd love to give the small blue a hand for their resilience and being able to occupy these lost landscapes. But I think the populations in Cumbria are still very, very delicate. And I think the most important thing now is to just make sure that these lost landscapes and brownfield sites aren't developed on, and that we protect them for the unique and beautiful flora and species that they do have. Next up, quickly, I'll go through the Duke of Burgundy. I feel like I'm running over time a bit. So the Duke of Burgundy butterfly used to be known as the Duke of Burgundy fritillary, but it's actually in the metalmark family, and it's the only metalmark that we have in the UK. It's actually really more of a tropical family of butterflies. But you can just see the difference here between the dark green fritillary at the bottom and the Duke of Burgundy at the top. The wing shape is much different, and the Duke of Burgundy is much smaller. So contrary to the small blue, the female will lay up to 5 eggs on one of the food plants and on the leaves, underside of the leaves of the food plant. The food plant being anything in the primula family, so cowslip or primrose. I say 5 eggs, we've actually found up to 9 eggs on one plant. I don't know if that was just a bit of a fluke. But it obviously means that the one plant is because they eat the leaves, probably there's more food source for more caterpillars. And it's probably more energy efficient to lay more eggs on one plant than flying around and finding lots of different plants. The great thing about the Duke of Burgundy caterpillars is that they eat specifically, so they exclusively don't eat the veins of the leaves. So this is a really good way of identifying whether a plant has a Duke of Burgundy caterpillar on it, and it really helps us with surveys, and it gives us a good estimate of population size in an area if we can find plants that have this unique pattern on them. And we know that there's caterpillars there because the caterpillars are actually much harder to find than seeing this leaf pattern, because especially in the daytime they sort of burrow down into the middle of the plant by the ground. So you see the adults flying at the end of May and through June, and the caterpillars go through all their instar phases through June and July. And then, contrary to the small blue, the Duke of Burgundy will have a chrysalis phase that lasts all of winter before flying again in May. It's fascinating how different species of butterflies have different life cycles. Yeah. This is a old casing of a chrysalis after a Duke of Burgundy has just emerged from it. I thought it just looked quite cool, a bit alien-like. So similar to the small blue, the Duke of Burgundy are habitat specialists, and like I said, they depend on these cowslip or primula plants. But they also have quite you tend to find them. We don't know if this is actually their optimal habitat, but we find them, and most people find them on these areas of limestone grassland or in woodland clearings. And in the grasslands, you tend to find them in these mid-successional habitats. So you've got the grassy areas, then you've got some scrubby bits coming through, and then maybe a woodland edge as well. Or you get these sort of tussocky grassy patches of big mounds of grass where the cowslip or primrose are sort of nestled in there. And we tend to find that you get the cowslip in the grasslandy areas, and then the primrose in the more woodland clearing coppiced areas. The Duke of Burgundy has seen a shocking statistic of up to 85% distribution decline nationally since the 1970s. And this is mainly due to habitat fragmentation, changes in management of habitat, and woodland coppicing changes as well. Luckily, the population has actually become a lot more stable nationally, and we are seeing increases in some areas, and this is all due to the and credit to the amazing work that lots of conservation organizations have been doing, including butterfly conservation. And we really, really would love to be a part of that here in Cumbria. We'd love to be able to have that optimism as well and support the Duke here. We do have populations here in Cumbria, but they are really tiny. So we have a small one in the Rustland Valley here on Whitberry National Nature Reserve, and down in the Arnside and Silverdale AONB. So our aim to help the Duke is to reinforce these populations that we have and expand their geographic range through translocation, and to help support this metapopulation structure. So this word metapopulation is used a lot in conservation and ecology. It basically means that you have a core population and then a few satellite populations in the surrounding area that are connected through corridors of appropriate habitat. So this is really great for genetic diversity, and it means that the populations are able to adapt to environmental and climatic change. It also provides insurance for satellite populations through any stochastic events, so any flooding or change in grazing regimes that can detriment a population in one area. Those butterflies are then able to move and recolonize new sites of their own accord. And this is something we really hope that we can do in Cumbria. And how are we going to do this? Well, there's a big focus on habitat management, which we are doing with some great groups of volunteers. We're also doing a lot of cowslip propagation and planting, again with some fantastic groups of community growers down in Barrows. So we're working with Allotment Soup, which is run by Art Gene Charity, and also Green Heart Den and Haverig Prison are helping us grow and plant thousands of cowslips across the project area. We're also monitoring and surveying our efforts to understand whether our efforts are beneficial and if it's actually creating any change. But the coolest thing we're doing is captive breeding, which I'll just talk about now. So last year we were fairly happy with the population sizes in these areas in Cumbria, and especially in the Rustland Valley, we'd found a lot of evidence of larval food damage on the cowslip, on the primrose plants, and we were fairly certain that there was a good sustainable population there. So we decided that we would do a little pilot captive breeding study. So Mick and I and Martin Wayne from Butterfly Conservation and one of our really dedicated volunteers, Julia Sire, collected 12 caterpillars from this site, and we split them between the four of us, and we cared for them over winter through their larval instar phases and through their chrysalis phase until spring this year. We noticed that they'd started to change colour, so they got a bit darker, meaning that they were ready to emerge. So Mick and I created this little release pen that's up in the right hand corner there with the hole in the top for the butterflies to emerge, which we put back in exactly the same place that we had collected the caterpillars from. So this was more of a reinforcement and a practice for us than it was sort of a full-scale reintroduction. And the reason for the release pen is so that we could see our emergence rate, so that we could find the chrysalis casings. And we did put a camera trap up there to sort of get an idea of this too, but that didn't work at all because it was too sunny and too windy. And so we were amazed with the success. So we had a 75% emergence rate from our captive bred caterpillars, and we were really happy with this. We were very enthusiastic and optimistic that we could do this full scale with a proper reintroduction this year. But unfortunately, things don't always turn out as you'd hoped. And after going full steam ahead with some adult Duke surveys and some larval food plant damage surveys, and even searching for actual caterpillars, we realized that the population sizes were down from last year, and it just wasn't sustainable enough for us to remove any caterpillars from these sites. It would have been irresponsible and ecologically unsound. So so we were very disheartened by this, because we were ready to do a big scale reintroduction. But saying this, butterfly populations fluctuate every year, and as humans, we do often find it difficult to understand why. We can speculate, but we're never really sure. And so next year we may find that we have a really, really good population. We can just keep our fingers and toes crossed that we do. And in the meantime, we can focus on maintaining the habitat and planting the larval food plants in the areas where the populations do exist, to reinforce them there, and hope that they can increase and spread of their own accord. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening. And if you did want to volunteer or just have any more questions, then feel free to contact us in any of the platforms listed below. Thank you. Bye.